Iran Daily Briefing, Wednesday, May 20th, 2026. President Donald Trump is again warning that the United States could strike Iran if a deal is not reached soon. France 24 reports that Trump said he could launch a fresh assault if there is no agreement in the next few days. Al Jazeera reports that he gave Tehran 2 to 3 days to reach a deal. That threat is now moving on two tracks: diplomacy with Iran and a political fight in Washington over who has authority to take the United States deeper into war. This is Wednesday, May 20th, 2026. The central story today is the narrowing space between talks and force. France 24 reports that Trump described talks with Tehran as very positive on May 18th, while also saying he had paused a planned military attack. RTE and the Times of India report that Trump said the pause was meant to allow negotiations. Iranian officials, meanwhile, are holding two lines at once. France 24's Reza Sayah reports from Tehran that officials say they prefer diplomacy and do not see a military solution. He also reports that they say Iran is ready if there is a war. Around that, there are accountability questions around a reported school strike, oil and shipping signals from the Strait of Hormuz, and sharper diplomatic positioning by outside powers. Gulf countries reportedly advised Trump against strikes, China called for an end to hostilities, and South Korea continued discussions over the HMM Namu incident. Today's episode begins with the US threat and the stalled negotiation track. Then we turn to Congress, shipping through Hormuz, and a congressional hearing over a reported strike on a school in Iran. The top story is the renewed US threat against Iran and the way it is being reported alongside a claimed pause for negotiations. France 24 reports that President Trump warned Tuesday that the United States may strike Iran again. It also reports that Washington and Tehran continued to trade threats after Trump said he could launch a fresh assault on Iran if a deal was not reached in the next few days. Al Jazeera reports a similar time frame. It says Trump gave Tehran 2 to 3 days to reach a deal. Al Jazeera also reports that US Vice President J.D. Vance said the United States is prepared to take military action if Iran does not agree to a nuclear deal. That places the immediate public pressure on Tehran, but it also places pressure on Washington's own process. The threat is being reported alongside Trump's comments that he paused an attack to allow negotiations. France 24 reports that Trump said on May 18th that he had paused a planned US military strike on Iran. RTE and the Times of India report that Trump said the pause in a planned attack was intended to allow negotiations to end the war in the Middle East. France 24 also reports that Trump said late on May 18th that he had called off strikes on Iran following advice from Gulf countries. That point matters for how he presented the decision. Trump publicly linked the pause to advice from Gulf countries. On the Iranian side, the public message is also dual-track. France 24's Reza Sayah reports from Tehran that Iranian officials maintained they prefer diplomacy. He also reports that officials said they do not see a military solution to the conflict. But in the same reporting, Iranian officials said Iran is ready if there is a war. France 24 reports that Iran threatened to open new fronts if the United States resumed strikes. The Times of Israel reports that Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps vowed the war would spread far beyond the region if the United States and Israel resumed strikes. So the public posture is clear on both sides. Washington is putting a short deadline around diplomacy and repeating that force remains an option. Tehran is saying it prefers a negotiated path, while warning that renewed strikes would broaden the conflict. There is also an information battle over responsibility for the crisis. Mehr News Agency and ERNA report that Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Baghai said today that the record of US mistreatment and broken commitments toward Iran spans more than 73 years. The same outlets report that Baghai rejected what he called a distorted narrative about the origins of tensions between Iran and the United States. That statement is not a negotiating offer, it is a framing statement. It tells domestic and foreign audiences how Tehran wants the current confrontation understood, not as a sudden crisis, but as part of a long record of US actions against Iran. The state of the talks remains unclear. France 24 reported that US-Iran talks were stalled as of May 18th. It also reported that neither side was willing to compromise on its demands. At the same time, France 24 reported that Trump described ongoing peace talks with Tehran as very positive on May 18th. Those are not identical messages. One describes a stalled process, the other describes a positive one. Both are in today's reporting. For listeners following yesterday's episode, this is the same thread. Trump had already said he was holding off on a planned attack while negotiations continued. Today's new development is the sharper deadline language and the additional US warning from Vice President Vance. Markets also registered the pause language. The Times of India reported that Brent crude fell 1.5% Tuesday after Trump said he had paused a planned attack on Iran. Al Jazeera reports that oil prices eased amid recent White House comments about a possible Iran deal. By Wednesday, Middle East Eye reported that Brent crude futures dropped 45 cents or 0.4% to $110.83 a barrel. It also reported that U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures fell 27 cents or 0.3% to $103.80. Those price moves do not settle the strategic picture. They show that energy markets are reacting to the public signals from Washington. The concrete thing to watch now is whether Washington or Tehran issues a new public statement that narrows the gap between the threat of renewed strikes and the reported negotiation track. Al Jazeera reports a 2 to 3 day US window. France 24 reports Trump said action could follow if a deal is not reached in the next few days. The first developing story is in Washington, where Congress is moving to limit the president's authority on Iran. Al Monitor and the Times of Israel report that the US Senate advanced a resolution to limit President Trump's war powers regarding Iran. Al Jazeera reports that the measure is intended to curb Trump's power to wage war on Iran. The Times of Israel reports that Republican Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana joined 3 Republicans in backing the Senate measure. This matters because the military threat against Iran is no longer only a White House message. It is now also a constitutional fight inside Washington over war powers. That fight is unfolding while the administration continues to say force remains available. Al Jazeera reports Vice President Vance said the United States is prepared to take military action if Iran does not agree to a nuclear deal. France 24 reports Trump warned of renewed strikes. The forward-looking point is straightforward. Watch whether the Senate measure moves further and whether the White House responds publicly to the war powers challenge. The second developing story is the Strait of Hormuz and the movement of tankers through it. France 24 reports that 2 Chinese oil tankers and 1 South Korean oil tanker crossed the Strait of Hormuz on Wednesday, citing maritime tracking data. Al Jazeera reports that Chinese supertankers exited the strait amid White House comments about a possible Iran deal. Middle East Eye reports that shipping data from the London Stock Exchange Group and Kpler showed 2 Chinese supertankers carrying about 4 million barrels of Middle Eastern crude oil departed the strait on Wednesday, after remaining in the Gulf for more than 2 months. Middle East Eye also reports that the South Korean-flagged supertanker Universal Winner began transmitting signals Wednesday morning, showing its presence in the Strait of Hormuz, south of Iran's Larak Island. This follows the shipping and strait story we covered yesterday. Then, the focus was Iran's new authority for managing the strait. Today, the new information is vessel movement. There is also a separate South Korea thread. Middle East Eye, citing Yonhap, reports that South Korea was continuing close and serious discussions over the May 4th attack on the South Korean-operated vessel HMM Namu in the Strait of Hormuz. Yonhap also reported that an official inquiry found 2 unidentified flying objects struck the HMM Namu, causing an explosion and fire. Another infrastructure-related claim needs more caution. Iran International reported that Tehran floated protection fees for subsea fiber optic cables crossing the Strait of Hormuz. This is a single-source Iran International report in the provided materials and has not been corroborated here. The thing to watch is whether Iranian authorities issue any formal guidance affecting traffic or infrastructure in the strait, and whether South Korea provides further public detail on the HMM Namu discussions. The third developing story is accountability over a reported strike on a school in Iran. Al-Monitor reports that a top commander of US forces in the Middle East avoided taking responsibility Tuesday for an attack on a school in Iran that left 155 people dead. Al-Monitor also reports that Admiral Brad Cooper told a congressional oversight panel that the school was located on an active, the IRGC cruise missile base. Middle East Eye reports that Congressman Adam Smith questioned Admiral Bradley Cooper during a House Armed Services Committee hearing about a girls' school struck in Iran. Middle East Eye reports that Cooper claimed during the hearing that the school was located on an active cruise missile base. Middle East Eye also reports that Cooper did not respond to Smith's questions about whether the United States should take responsibility for the strike. In separate coverage, Middle East Eye reports that Cooper declined to accept responsibility for the February 28 attack on a school in Iran. There is a discrepancy in the reported death toll. Al-Monitor reports that the attack left 155 people dead. Middle East Eye reports that the February 28 attack reportedly killed about 170 people, most of them children. Those casualty figures and responsibility questions are based on reported accounts and hearing coverage. This script has not been provided an official transcript of the hearing or independent casualty verification. The specific thing to watch is whether the House Armed Services Committee, U.S. Central Command, or the Pentagon releases a transcript, statement, or further public record, clarifying Cooper's testimony and the U.S. position on responsibility. The fourth developing story is the political temperature inside Iran. France 24 reports that Iranian authorities held mass public weddings in Tehran for couples enrolled in a state-sponsored scheme. It also reports that the couples had signed up to a scheme declaring readiness to sacrifice their lives in the war against the United States and Israel. That event shows how the conflict is being reflected in public political rituals inside Iran. It is not a battlefield development, it is a domestic mobilization signal. There are also 2 political items from Iran International that require careful wording. Iran International reported that a parliamentary proposal in Iran offered a $50 million reward for the killing of President Trump. This is reported by Iran International as a parliamentary proposal. The provided sources do not show it became law or official government policy, and no second source in the provided set confirms it. A separate parliamentary proposal is not the same as state policy. That distinction matters. Iran International also reported that the Tehran Stock Exchange reopened Tuesday after an 80-day shutdown, and that 42 major firms remained suspended when it reopened. The thing to watch is whether Iranian state outlets or parliament provide any official action on the reported proposal, and whether Iran International or other outlets report further changes in the Tehran Stock Exchange reopening. The fuller picture behind the cold open is this. France 24 reports that Trump warned Tuesday that the United States may strike Iran again. It also reports that he said he could launch a fresh assault if a deal was not reached in the next few days. Al Jazeera reports that Trump gave Tehran 2 to 3 days to reach a deal. Al Jazeera also reports that Vice President J.D. Vance said the United States is prepared to take military action if Iran does not agree to a nuclear deal. At the same time, France 24 reports that Trump described ongoing peace talks with Tehran as very positive on May 18th. RTE and The Times of India report that Trump said a paused attack was intended to allow negotiations. France 24 reports that Trump said, late on May 18th, that he had called off strikes on Iran following advice from Gulf countries. Iran's public position, as reported by France 24's Reza Sayah from Tehran, is that officials prefer diplomacy and do not see a military solution. France 24 also reports that Iranian officials say Iran is ready if there is a war. France 24 reports that Iran threatened to open new fronts if the United States resumed strikes. So the cold open story is not just a threat. It is a threat being made while both sides continue to speak publicly about diplomacy, and while Washington's own legislature is moving to limit the president's war authority. In the next 24 to 48 hours, watch 3 items. First, watch for any new public statement from Washington or Tehran on the negotiation track. Al Jazeera reports that Trump gave Tehran 2 to 3 days to reach a deal. France 24 reports that Trump said he could launch a fresh assault if a deal was not reached in the next few days. France 24 also reports that Iranian officials say they prefer diplomacy, while saying Iran is ready if there is a war. Second, watch whether the US Senate measure on Iran war powers advances further or draws a White House response. Al Monitor and The Times of Israel report that the Senate advanced a resolution to limit Trump's war powers regarding Iran. Al Jazeera reports that the measure is intended to curb his power to wage war on Iran. Third, watch the Strait of Hormuz file. France 24 reports that 2 Chinese oil tankers and 1 South Korean oil tanker crossed the strait on Wednesday. Middle East Eye, citing shipping data from the London Stock Exchange Group and KPLA, reports that 2 Chinese supertankers carrying about 4 million barrels of Middle Eastern crude departed the strait after more than 2 months in the Gulf. Also, watch whether Iranian authorities issue any formal guidance affecting traffic or infrastructure, and whether South Korea releases further detail on the HMM Namu discussions reported by Yonhap. Today we covered renewed US strike warnings against Iran, the stalled diplomacy around them, a Senate war powers challenge, tanker movements through the Strait of Hormuz, and accountability questions around a reported school strike. Join us again tomorrow for the next Iran Daily Briefing. For full written briefs and source-backed updates, check out the Iran Brief on Substack. Paid members can build multi-country monitoring across the countries they care about, with personalized briefings delivered automatically.